Hello there, and thank you for tuning in to watch this presentation. My name is Dr. Matthew Scott, and I'm a Research and Policy Officer at the UK charity National Energy Action. To briefly say who we are and what we do, we work across England, Wales and Northern Ireland to ensure that everyone in the UK can afford to live in a warm, dry home. To achieve this, we champion and deliver energy efficiency programmes, aim to improve access to energy and debt advice, we provide training, and we also coordinate other related services which helps to change lives. In a previous life, I also worked at Newcastle University on the decarbonisation of domestic heat, focusing particularly on hydrogen. Now, in this presentation, I want to think through a very specific aspect of the decarbonisation of domestic heat, that which often falls under the banner of the word disruption. Now, this is an exploratory presentation, the aim of which isn't to set out a coherent set of policy proposals or give a definitive answer to any of the issues that I'm going to be talking about. Rather, it's to try and think through the ways that disruption is becoming a part of the domestic decarbonisation agenda and try to indicate what this might mean for making decarbonisation fair. Now, my starting point here is that decarbonising heat will require people to make infrastructural changes inside their homes that will fundamentally change the way they interact with energy in their everyday lives. For households that struggle to access affordable warmth, these changes may be unduly disrupted and, if managed poorly, could exacerbate rather than alleviate the depth and severity of energy poverty. Now, disruption has recently risen up the agenda in discussions of decarbonisation. For example, in the UK, a recent government inquiry and consultation on the decarbonisation of heat asked the question, what action is required to ensure that households are engaged, informed, supported and protected during the transition to low carbon heat, including measures to minimise disruption in homes and to maintain consumer choice. But in these debates, my hunch is that we haven't actually stopped to consider what disruption means in enough detail, and I want to try and begin to do this in the next few minutes. So specifically, I want to suggest in the brief time that I have that there is one emerging way of talking about disruption in the policy and industry landscape in the UK, something I want to term consumer disruption. Now, this has quickly turned into the dominant way that disruption is envisaged in industry documents and broader technocratic discourse. Now, in this conception, as these two quotes start to indicate, consumers live their lives and heat their homes in relatively homogeneous ways, and it is this stability, this status quo, that is seen as something that needs to be protected and insulated from decarbonisation at all costs. Low carbon heating interventions such as heat pumps or maybe later down the line hydrogen systems are envisioned in terms of the extent to which they will disrupt this status quo, whether through the ripping of floorboards to install new pipes or the replacement of radiators. Now, in this conception, as the second quote shows on this slide, disruption is also closely linked to notions of consumer acceptability. So the equation says that the more disruption there is, the less likely consumers will be to accept a new heating technology. And one example of this from the UK context is how proponents of using hydrogen to replace natural gas in the gas networks and in gas boilers have talked up the minimal disruption that they think this will cause compared to alternatives such as heat pumps, as this little extract from a recent document produced by the UK gas networks shows. So the upshot of this conception is that decarbonisation will be disruptive, that this is bad news and this needs to be minimised as much as possible if we are to succeed. Disruption upsets how things are, which means it should be avoided or minimised. Now, however, where we want to come from on this is that for energy poor households, how things are typically unacceptable. Cold homes are unacceptable and energy poverty is unacceptable. And the status quo for too many households is defined by sitting under a duvet on the sofa, a plug-in heater close by, with the rest of the home freezing, cold and unheated. So for these households, we absolutely have to minimise the amount of disruption that installing low carbon heating may bring. But we should also be actively trying to use the decarbonisation of heat as a mechanism through which we can deliver real, tangible benefits to households that struggle to stay warm at an affordable cost. Now, in the rest of this presentation, I want to draw on some examples from NEA's research and evaluation work to start to show how this might be done. Now, specifically, we are currently evaluating an energy poverty programme in the UK that involves installing heat pumps in rural and remote communities in England, Wales and Scotland, as well as gas central heating systems in urban areas in England, Wales and Scotland. But this programme also provides parallel advice and support services as part of a more holistic approach to alleviating energy poverty. As part of this work, we have interviewed a number of partners from local and regional government who are in charge of managing and overseeing the delivery of these measures. And the first really key finding of this work that I want to highlight is the importance of installers. And What I mean by this is having manufacturers and installers who understand the needs of energy poor and vulnerable households and can adapt their delivery of heating systems, whether gas central heating or in the future low carbon heating systems, to the needs of energy poor and vulnerable households. Compare these two quotes. So the first, this is a delivery partner explaining what was good about their installers and why they thought they were really valuable to their process of engaging energy poor households and making installations run smoothly. And compare it to the second one, which was a different interviewee saying an example of when things went wrong. So what this means, in order to minimise disruption, we need installers who are trained, skilled and can understand how to make the customer journey, if you like, as smooth as possible when they are doing their work. The second thing we've learned from this work is that heating installations are perceived to have the largest and most beneficial impacts for energy poor households when they are accompanied by detailed, patient and long-term advice and support given to residents about the new heating system at multiple points along the customer journey. So one local government energy team at the top here described how having the funding for their advice workers to make multiple visits to households before, immediately after, and then a couple of times following that was absolutely essential to making sure households were happy with their heat pump, knew how to use it properly, and also acted as a way to proactively identify any issues that they were experiencing with the heat pump so that remedial action could be taken or that additional advice could be provided. Now, without this support, this local government representative continued, some households just wouldn't have been able to have the install. They wouldn't have been able to cope, they told us. In short, they wouldn't have been able to handle the disruption, and it would have left them in an infinitely worse position with a new, basically electric-only heating system that they didn't know how to use. However, as the second quote also shows here, it's not just about being able to provide the appropriate advice and instruction about the heating system itself. What we learned through evaluating this programme is that having services like this that can also provide key support with things like energy efficiency advice, income maximisation work through supplier switching, and also, as this example on the slide shows, fuel debt and supporting fuel poor households and energy poor households with fuel debt can make a real difference in providing a holistic energy poverty offering to households. So this last bit of this quote is really important. So this household suddenly gets a new gas central heating system to heat the property, but at the same time they're not having to worry about their debt. They're not having to worry about how they're going to pay bills in the future. And it's that holistic offering that presents a real opportunity, not just in minimising disruption, but in maximising the benefits that can be brought to energy poor households through decarbonisation and through the installation of low carbon heating systems. So just briefly to end, I want to end on 3 points. These, as I've said at the start, are not sort of a set of policy proposals. They're just a few thoughts about what we think we've learned from this research and how this could be adopted going forwards. So the first is that we need to be providing frameworks for advice provision within centrally funded low carbon heating programs. It's not enough to just fund hard measures, so it's not enough to just fund a heat pump without having any advice and wraparound support included within that. And we also need to try and include within that support on energy efficiency, on debt and also on income maximisation to holistically provide the benefits that we can to energy poor households. We also need to try and maximise the number of installers and manufacturers who understand the needs of low income, vulnerable and energy poor households and who are prepared to take the time to ensure those households understand and can use their heating systems properly. And finally, we also need appropriate regulation and redress, both to right wrongs and to also provide households with confidence in the process. So just to end, the decarbonisation of domestic heat will be disruptive, and we absolutely need to be thinking now about how that disruption could be minimised. But we also need to be thinking now about how we can not just minimise disruption, but actively transform the delivery of low carbon heating systems in homes into customer journeys, if you like, that end with life substantially enhanced for every energy poor household that has one installed. We also need to try and just talk a little differently about disruption, especially disruption as it is conceived of in the consumer disruption conception that I was talking about earlier. We need to move beyond it. We need to talk about minimising disruption as well as maximising the benefits that we can bring as a result of decarbonisation. So I understand, and we know of course, that this is a small piece of the wider decarbonisation puzzle, and I'm really looking forward to, as are my colleagues at NEA, with engaging with this conference at the beginning of March. Hopefully this presentation has given an indication of a small piece of the puzzle and how we might think differently about it. Thank you.